Three. Hello, everyone. So my name is Mike Lee. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City. I was not a car guy, but I absolutely loved the concept cars. And I thought it was remarkable that a whole industry spent that much time and attention to manifesting a future in a product that was not meant to be sold. And I remember when I began working in food and going to trade shows and things like that, hoping to see the future of food, just like I saw in those concept cars. And then being let down that I didn't see anything that ambitious or forward thinking. In fact, I just saw variations of things like kale chips and protein bars. And so it got me thinking, and the talk I want to give today is about this idea of how can we get people in food and ag to think more like the auto industry and their concept cars? And can that kind of forward thinking change the way that they behave today? So I started to look at other industries where futuristic visions had influenced people who built things in those industries. And I learned about a man named Martin Cooper. He was the head of R&D at Motorola in the 1970s. Cooper and his team are widely credited with being first to create the mobile phone. And if that wasn't remarkable enough, Cooper has gone on record saying that Star Trek was one of the things that inspired him most to create that. Now, hearing that was a profound moment for me that showed how a piece of science fiction could turn into science fact. And it led me to incorporate the tools of foresight and scenario planning in my food innovation work with clients. So my mission became focused on creating smarter, more creative, and more insightful visions of the future in order to affect change today in food. And that's the goal of foresight and what I wanted to talk to you about today. Now, when you have the title Food Futurist in your bio, a lot of people come out of the woodwork asking you to predict the future. And I have to politely correct them that that's not what foresight is. It's not having a crystal ball. And to be honest, if anyone tells you they can reliably predict the future, they're absolutely lying to you. But instead, to me, foresight is more like being a map maker. It's a structured and methodical way of thinking about the future. Foresight doesn't ever claim to predict the future, but it can give you the tools to envision it in a much, much smarter way. Foresight is a tool that gives you more insight, more depth, more creativity, more nuance, more understanding about how the world works and the causal relationships between all the different nodes in the system, especially the food system. But in a nutshell, the foresight process starts with scanning for current day signals of things that suggest something new is happening, but has not yet become mainstream or reached its full potential. Think about things like cellular agriculture or AI. Generative AI. And then you pick the signals that seem like they might have a huge impact on your world in the future, and you begin to build a world around them. Once you have that vision of a few plausible future worlds, you can do the analysis of deciding whether or not you're prepared to thrive in that future. And it may sound like writing science fiction or fantasy, but the difference is that foresight needs to be rooted in the truth of today. That's the biggest difference between foresight and science fiction, is that science fiction can be completely fabricated by someone's imagination. Foresight can't, useful foresight at least. It has to be at least rooted in things that are true today, but are uncertain how they might pan out tomorrow. So why does food need foresight? With big challenges tied to food and agriculture like climate change, soil degradation, diet-related diseases looming large, and kind of business as usual is not really any longer an option for much longer. But despite these kind of looming dangers, food companies and consumers alike are frequently stuck in short-term thinking. And food is unique because it touches so many major issues for human and planetary health, where planning for the long-term future is absolutely essential to our survival. So I'd like to share 4 big reasons why I think foresight is uniquely suited to help the food and agriculture industry. Reason number 1, food is defined by tensions. I am constantly excited and motivated to work in the food industry because I love the tensions in scale and thinking that food holds. Food is big, but food is also very small, meaning the global food and ag industry is worth about $11 trillion per year, yet somewhere at a university, a student is eating a $1 pack of instant ramen. Food is logical and it's also illogical. The path that a humble banana takes from farm to home involves thousands of people, dozens of touch points, and requires an immense amount of organization and planning. Yet somewhere, someone is throwing away that banana uneaten because it has a minor blemish on the outside. So we need to constantly be reminded that most people make food decisions with emotions, not logic. You know how I know this is that how many of you have ever eaten your favorite meal ever and then leaned back in your chair and said, oh my gosh, that was so sustainable? Food is full of contradictions like this: big, small, logic, emotion. And since foresight has its roots in classical storytelling, which spends most of its time exploring the tensions of the human experience, it's also a great tool to explore the tensions in the food industry because they involve so much of the human experience. Conventional business thinking taught in business schools, they discount the power of emotion, and they don't meaningfully account for the value of small human moments. Food is messy. It's big and complicated, but we eat it one bite at a time, and it's one of the most intimate things that we ever do. So I think to understand food and to thrive in the future of food, you need to be able to analyze the complexity of that mess and sort of embrace it for what it is. And that's something that foresight, the tools that foresight have, is really designed to do. Reason number 2, food is an extremely complicated system. People often refer to the global food system as a supply chain, but I don't think the word chain is actually the right metaphor. Instead, I think domino effect is more of an apt analogy, because for every action in the food system, there's an there's an equal reaction on something else. And food does not exist in a vacuum. It's something that's woven into almost every other system on the planet. And sometimes our narrow focus on the goals of our company or job can just really mute the effects of our actions on the rest of the system, the planet, human health. For example, I remember over a decade ago when plant-based products first had their surge, and things like plant-based mayonnaise, kind of, made from yellow peas, were all the rage. At the time, they were sort of heralded as sort of the saviors of the planet that would make animal agriculture obsolete and things like that. But then I really thought, here's this thing that's being kind of positioned as this super sustainable thing. But, let's say if their dreams came true and they dominated the world with plant-based mayo made with peas, we'd simply trade one monoculture for another. And if you're trying to make the food system more sustainable, the last thing we need is yet another monoculture, plant or animal. And so most people doing something new in food, they're so preoccupied with getting that thing off the ground that they don't have time to think about the long-term implications of their inventions. I frequently tell founders of food startups and brand managers at big FMCG companies to assume from the start that if you're launching a new product or service, assume from the start that it might become a multi-billion-dollar venture. And then as you're building it from scratch, ask yourself if the system you've created, even at an early stage, is it good for the planet? Is it good for people if it reached a billion-dollar scale? Because I think a lot of times established brands have become victims of their own success. They kind of built something taking shortcuts, and then it becomes popular. And then by the time it becomes so popular, ingrained in society, and the revenue is feeding all of these people that work for the company, it's really hard to pivot and become something else on a systemic level. So I think we can't really afford anymore to build unsustainable food companies from the beginning and then use the proceeds of their successful revenues later to fund some nonprofit that'll try to undo the harms that were inflicted on the planet from that unsustainable venture in the first place. We need to get people to make things that consider the food industry as a true interconnected system and build that natively into the brands and companies that are coming into the future. And foresight is a tool that can help expand people's horizons and force them to look more holistically at the rest of the world. Reason number 3, humans are very biased towards the present. We don't often see the full cause and effect of our behavior today in food because the distance between cause and effect in food is typically measured in decades. So let's say it's dinner time and I offered you a delicious looking cheeseburger right now and you're very hungry and it looks really, really good to you. But there's a catch. With this cheeseburger, there's a 50% chance that you might immediately vomit right away. Would you eat it? Probably not. But what if I said that the catch changed? What if I said the same juicy cheeseburger that looks really delicious would give you a 50% chance of vomiting 30 years from now? Would you be more or less likely to eat it? It's an outrageous example for sure, but it highlights a behavior that humans do daily with food, which is we overweight the immediate effects and we underweight the future effects. And this happens in our personal lives, but also in our jobs. This cartoon, I think, aptly sums up that point and our obsession with the present, which reads, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. When we buy that plastic bottle of water at the airport, we don't think about it floating in the ocean for eternity. We just see the comfort of not being thirsty on a 90-minute flight. When we smoke that last cigarette of the night, we don't think about the cancer it might cause later in life. We just think of the nicotine hitting our brains and soothing us right then and there. Our bias towards the present is what lets us order that one more drink at the bar at last call. It's what lets us to go ahead and take that extra slice of pizza. It what tells us that we can spray one more dose of Roundup on the crops. Foresight, by definition, is a tool that aims to place you into the future. But obviously, no one has a time machine, so it really doesn't move you there. It just moves your mind there. And the good news with that is that you can transport your brain into a future state and have a vivid vision of the future that can show you the ramifications of your actions today, but your body is still placed in the present, and it can kind of cause you to act a little bit differently in today. I think good foresight takes your mind into the future in a way that's believable and compelling enough that it can affect your current day choices to be wiser and more successful about the things you have to do. We really don't have time machines, but that doesn't mean we can't imagine what a time machine would bring you into. Reason number 4, we need more moonshots in food. Moonshots meaning ambitious, exploratory, groundbreaking projects that could drastically improve the human condition if successful. Now, I remember a story way back in 2006, right as I started working in food. A colleague sent an article to me. And the article was about a packaging company that had won an award for Innovation of the Year within the packaging industry. The award was given to a new packaging innovation whereby you could open a package of biscuits, or cookies as we call them in the States, from the top instead of the sides. This innovation was called Snack and Seal technology, and it was used on the Kraft food company's Chips Ahoy brand of cookies. Now, in the article, a spokesperson for Kraft was quoted in the article saying that Snack and Seal is a patented product packaging system that, through the use of technology and consumer insights, delivers a true innovation to the marketplace. A true innovation to the marketplace. And I wondered, how did we get to a place in the food industry where someone would call this true innovation? I mean, sure, like packaging companies have to find ways to stay relevant, right? And I'm not saying that people working at packaging companies should stop making stuff like this, small or incremental improvements like this. But when we have a degenerative food system that's draining the soil of vitality, releasing tons of carbon in the atmosphere, combining with a global obesity epidemic accelerated by cheap processed snacks, getting the cookie to open from the top instead of the side feels a little bit like we're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The food industry really needs to kind of start recalibrating its definition of what innovation truly is. And I think foresight can expand our minds to see what innovations have staying power and which ones are simply things that we do in the meantime that are just kind of fun to do or just incremental. Because better innovation today starts with more ambitious thinking about tomorrow. When your organization has an ambitious vision of the future, it creates energy that everyone can feel. The power of an audacious vision can make the most mundane jobs within a company feel noble. Imagine maybe you're an hourly worker at a tractor company, and your job is in charge of making sure that you have enough nuts and bolts for the assembly line. It might not be your dream job, but it pays the bills and you can get by. But the energy around doing that same exact job for a company that's maybe working on a space shuttle or a well that's going to be installed in a place that's hit by drought even the person in charge of the nuts and bolts can go to work every day knowing that their labor is actually going to something more bold and more positive. Ambition creates energy throughout organizations, and foresight takes you to a place where the limitations and the possibilities of today are absolutely different. It raises the bar for what true innovation can be, and that creates better visions of the future, which leads to a lot more inspiring and intelligent action plans for today. So we need more moonshots in food. So what does foresight look like? It feels like a little bit of an abstract idea, but I want to share with you 3 examples of the ways that we've kind of tackled this to do a lot of those things that I just talked about. It can manifest in a lot of different ways. Now, future scenarios surely can be written down in PowerPoint decks or white papers, of course, and that can certainly have some value. But, you know, honestly, to me, coming up with the ideas about the future, that's only really half the battle. The other half is finding a way to express those ideas so you can grab and hold the attention of your audience. It's really hard for people to imagine the future. It's really hard for people to get up and want to change, especially if there's been established ways of doing things, especially if it's a future that bears a little resemblance to today. And future worlds can definitely be disorienting. So the way you illustrate that future has to be in a way that's familiar and relatable for the people of today if you want to capture their attention. There's a reason why cars are rated in horsepower. There's a reason why cars are rated in horsepower, because at the advent of the car, it was such a foreign idea that nobody knew how to measure how fast it went. And so it was necessary to translate that thing of the future, the car, using the language of the past, which was a horse. When something is wildly new, and frequently in foresight, you're thinking about things that are wildly new, you really need to anchor it in something that people are already accustomed to. Many times we take very forward-looking, radically different ideas about the food system and we package them in actually ways that look very accessible or even mundane to people today. Like with this concept brand that we created called Varietal Crop Crackers. The crop cracker was born from a question that we asked, which was how might we create a non-monoculture food system? These crackers are made from ingredients found in a regional crop rotation, in this case, the Washington state in the United States. And instead of simply just using monoculture wheat, the idea came to us when we spoke to a lot of farmers in the Northwest, and we got to understand what kinds of crops they could rotate on their land to keep their soil healthy. They gave us these 8 ingredients as the ones that work best in their regional soil conditions. It's funny at first because we were asking them, what would you plant if your main goal was optimizing soil health? And they were completely confused by the question because no one had ever asked them that. One guy even got really frustrated with us and just said, just tell me how much wheat you want and leave me alone. So we realized that farmers in this region, and I think farmers in a lot of places, they weren't incentivized to keep their soil healthy with rotations and things like that. They were incentivized to plant the same damn wheat every season and then use fertilizer and other synthetics to keep the soil fed. But we finally got them to tell us their ideal crop rotation, and to them it was just their crop rotation. But to us it was our pantry. And we decided to take these 8 ingredients and create multiple flavors of a cracker with them. And we did that for a lot of reasons, like the fact that cracker recipes happen to be pretty flexible and you can incorporate a wide variety of ingredients into them. It's a lot harder to involve all of these ingredients if you're making croissants or something like that. Crackers are also in the United States a $4 billion market in the States that is really, really mature. And nobody needs a long-winded explanation about what a cracker is. People already buy them. They're in every grocery store. And you didn't really have to explain that part to them, which left you bandwidth to explain to them the whole idea of a crop rotation and soil health. And this was different because, like, normally in a FMCG company, they decide that they're going to make a product, then the agricultural system has to supply the ingredients that go into that product. And heaven forbid that product becomes successful, the farmers who supply that brand are essentially locked into those monocultures, producing as much ingredient as possible to supply the demand for that product. Farmers can't really decide to rotate their crops because losing out on a season of supplying that big brand with that commodity is really costly, and they might be left out of the supply chain if they do that. But the radical idea that we think is future-looking of the crop cracker is that If this product became a multi-billion-dollar brand, then it'll incentivize more farmers, $1 billion worth of farmers, to plant more biodiverse sets of rotational crops. In a world where something like a crop cracker drives the success of big food, farmers can't afford to not rotate their crops. So the Humble Cracker was a product that really represented a future scenario where biodiversity was the defining feature of our ag system, not monocultures. It's an example of how our brand of foresight can manifest itself in the food industry, and even inspired one of our clients, a major multinational dairy company, to formulate some of their plant-based milk products based off of biodiverse crops instead of monocultures. Now, a large amount of our interactions with food happen at dining tables, which we're immersed at the sights and sounds of eating with others. Yet so many conversations about the future of food happen in conference halls and meeting rooms. I got my start in food actually in 2007, producing and chefing pop-up dinner events in New York City. We did this in a really underground fashion, so we had no official licenses or certifications, and we only revealed the location of our events even on the day of the event. But because we were not a traditional restaurant, we were able to push the envelope of what a dining experience was. And one of the things that our dinners were known for having was a strong narrative that tied the courses together. Now, some would look at our menus and see a 6 or 7 course tasting menu, but I viewed that menu more like the same way a DJ would assemble a mixtape or a band would create a set list, where each course was its own unique flavor experience, but it also helped tell different chapters of the story. These narrative-driven dinners became useful in our foresight work. They were vehicles for bringing food foresight to life. So one example of this was the Future of Protein dinner, where my team created a multi-course tasting menu where each course represented some aspect of the future of protein conversation. Protein is still regarded as the thing that anchors the meal, right? The thing that's on the center of the plate, so to speak. And with something as central to our diets as protein, we wanted to hold a conversation about the future of protein in a way that engaged all the senses, not just the eyes and ears. I'm a firm believer that people don't eat statistics, they eat food. And we've all read the data about feed conversion ratios and energy consumption and carbon capture that goes into industrial animal agriculture and things like that. But I don't really think the average person outside of the food industry can really wrap their heads around what that actually means until they have something in front of them that they can actually relate to. This particular dish was a 1-ounce portion of ribeye steak, 1 ounce, served to each individual with a 58-ounce family-style selection of vegetables in the center of the table. So the relationship between these portions, that it takes roughly about the same amount of fossil fuels to produce the 1 ounce of steak as it does the 58 ounces of vegetables. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm an avid meat eater, and I'm in full support of responsibly raised meat around our world, but we should be more aware and go in eyes wide open at the amount of resources it takes to grow our food. And the 1 ounce of meat we served here, it came from a local pasture-raised farm that practiced rotational grazing and were really great stewards of lands and their animals. And the message we wanted to send was not to eliminate meat entirely from your diet, but when you do have meat, choose stuff that's responsibly raised and great tasting, and possibly eat less of it, but eat better quality of it. I also believe that the future of food needs to be more biodiverse. This dish was inspired by eating sushi. It's called the biodiverse plate, where a good sushi chef will know what fish is best and what's in season, what's not being overfished, and serve an assortment of different selections. I remember sitting down once at a sushi bar in New York City and ordering an omakase platter where the chef would select the best pieces for me. And then next to me sat down a guy who ordered 12 whole pieces of bluefin tuna. And so to me, this instinct of finding one thing that we love and only eating that thing is what causes so many issues in the food system. It's why bluefin tuna are overfished, and it's why we have massive monocultures. The biodiverse plate was made out of small portions of 12 different proteins ranging from yak to mussels to bison, along with less popular cuts from the traditional beef, pork, and chicken cuts. And on the side was a portion of polenta made from the Three Sisters, which was corn, beans, and squash, which is arguably one of the oldest examples of polyculture farming. And the goal here was to illustrate how eating a more biodiverse diet in the future was not just more sustainable for the planet, but more exciting for the eater from a culinary standpoint. And finally, we closed the dinner out with a dessert made from algae and aquafaba, which is the water that chickpeas are stored in that can be whipped into a meringue. And many people talk about how ingredients like algae are the proteins of the future. They talk about how they'll save the planet by supplying protein with little to no carbon footprint. And there are many proteins out there that cite similar benefits for the planet, but no one really talks about their ability to be hedonistic. And for us, packaging an academically sustainable ingredient like algae into a decadent sort of avant-garde dessert wasn't simply a creative exercise for us. It was a move that is going to be absolutely necessary for anyone trying to sell the next big thing in sustainable protein to the masses. Taste creates the positive emotions that dictate what we choose to eat. And no matter how logical it may be to eat a food for the sake of the planet, you'll get absolutely nowhere if you can't create a great taste impression. And finally, the newest way that we've brought the future of food to life is, like Kale said, my new book, MISE, on the future of food. It was created to be an artifact from the future, so to speak, where you can sort of imagine stepping into a time machine, going forward in time, buying the book, and bringing it back to the present day with you. It covers a wide range of topics that are nascent today but could be wildly impactful in the future of food and agriculture. Things like generative AI, precision agriculture, personalized nutrition, regen ag, and so many different more things. The book is composed of 4 big scenarios about the future of food, ranging from the year 2033 to 2067. Each scenario has a macro scale summary of what the world looks like in that time period, which is paired with intimate stories about everyday people living in those worlds, again, bringing that contrast of big and small together. It captures the full spectrum of logic, emotion, big and small, and has pointed recommendations for today's food innovators on how to move faster towards utopia and avoid dystopia. Now, these stories might be set really far into the future, but make no mistake, they're designed to encourage action from the food industry today. Stories that touch on the second coming of the Green Revolution, where precision agriculture powered by AI and robotics is used to boost yields at farms that's at a pace not seen since the first Green Revolution. This scenario explores what the limitations and the opportunities might be of the human quest to use technology to bend nature to its will. Or we explore the emerging world of personalized nutrition, where advanced nutrition science, wearable and implantable sensors, and machine learning can optimize our health with real-time food recommendations. This scenario helps us consider the impact that food tech can have on our interpersonal relationships and food cultures, and ask ourselves, is it worth it to have a world where technology makes you healthy, but we don't know what to eat without our digital devices? The regenerative dystopia scenario imagines how the still nascent regenerative agriculture movement could absolutely disappear. The story here centers on snake oil salesmen and charlatans that co-opt the movement and bastardize it for their own personal gain. Now, one of the best things you can do if you support something is to imagine how it might fail, and that's exactly sort of what this scenario does, because if you don't figure out the weaknesses on your movement organization, someone else will find those weaknesses for you. And finally, in a new superpower, we envision a not too far-fetched future where China becomes the world's sole superpower by dominating clean energy. By 2067, they become sort of an OPEC for clean energy and can export it all to other countries using highly advanced battery technology, which they already own. China's cheap, clean energy enables thousands of indoor controlled environment farms to spring up everywhere. And these are technologies that became so much more economically viable with inexpensive Chinese green energy. But the world is now forced to contend with an increasingly harsh and draconian human rights policies that oppress their citizens. So the book was designed like a magazine, complete with AI-generated images and speculative advertisements. Now, I'm not saying that paper magazines will still necessarily exist in the year 2067, but they do today. And like I talked about, there's a reason why cars are rated in horsepower. There's power in using the conventions of today to tell the stories of tomorrow. And unlike a traditional book, magazines have a strong sense of time. If you pick up an old magazine from the 1970s in a used bookstore, you immediately know where it's from and when it's from. And with MISE, I wanted to create the same time travel effect, except for the future instead of the past. Now, if there's one big idea I want you to take away from our time together today, it's that the future of food and agriculture is not a spectator sport. If you ever encounter food trends that you like or dislike, you have the ability to do something about it so they proliferate or go away. The future is not something that happens to us. It's something that we build. And in something so important as food and agriculture, we can't really afford to get it wrong. I hope I've made the case to you today that practicing good foresight can help the food innovators of today build a better food system for tomorrow. Thank you.